All right, good evening, welcome everyone. It is 6:01 PM, Wednesday, September 4th. This is the regular board meeting of the Truckee Donner Public Utility District. And Sarah, could we have roll call, please?
Director Guerra?
Here.
Director Laliotis?
Here.
Vice President Finn?
Here.
President Bender?
Here.
The record will note Director Harris is absent.
All right. Okay. Joe,
Yes.
would you like to lead us in the pledge tonight?
I would.
Thank you.
I would. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
There she is.
There we go, there's Kim. Thank you, Joe. We've got an update to roll call. Okay, any changes to the agenda tonight?
It pleases the board, President Bender, we'd like to make one minor change in terms of our workshops, item number 16 and 17. We'd just like to switch the order in respect for our friends with CMUA have a commute home. So we'll have them do the presentation first and then the UAMPS presentation after that.
You got it. Noted. We'll do that. Okay. And, all right. Okay, public comment. Any public comment on any matter not on the agenda tonight? All right, seeing none, we'll close public comment. And director update. You ready, Kim?
You looked left.
All right, look left.
Yes, I always like to take this opportunity to thank our staff members. And I know it's been a wild summer and we are into fall now, into wildfire season. And I'm sure we all hear the helicopters flying over, trying to put out the fire up near Loyalton. And so my heart goes out to anybody who lives up in that area, because I think we have employees that may live close to that area. But I also appreciate our staff who is local here, who that they are still, keeping the electricity going and the water flowing and the customers happy. So thank you, staff.
All right, Tony, thank you. Any updates?
No updates, thank you.
Okay, Joe, any updates?
Yeah, I have some updates, but I think it's going to come up later on in the meeting.
Oh, okay.
So,
Nice.
thank you, Mr. President. We have a couple of an evacuee from that fire in the audience. Yeah.
Krista, any updates?
A quick update, yes, a quick report out. I attended this morning's CCC meeting, the Convene Champion Catalyze meeting, which is a meeting of all the local governments, nonprofits, districts, movers, and they meet monthly through the year, and the subjects change sort of seasonally. Anyway, this morning's meeting was pretty much a debrief about the past fire and how that went for all of us agencies. So we heard from Truckee Fire, CAL FIRE, Town of Truckee Police, Town of Truckee Emergency Services, and our own Stephen Poncelet reported out on behalf of the PUD. Consensus seems to be that we all did a really good job. The response was swift and efficient. Incident command functioned smoothly. Communication between the entities was effective and timely and functional. So much so that we averted some potential compounding issues like NV Energy de-energizing their transmission lines up to Tahoe Donner, because that is where the fire was headed. But we managed that communication in such a way that was avoided. So I guess sadly, it's kind of like an ideal catastrophe, and that it gave us a chance to fully deploy, in a real situation, our responses and see how we all worked together. But I just want to emphasize that this good result was not luck. These things don't happen by accident. This is the result of planning and practice and leadership. You might remember earlier in the summer, we participated in a community-wide emergency drills. The PUD did, the whole town did. And even before that, thinking back, when PG&E first began their PS policy and turned off the power in Placerville, and just that sort of the kind of panicky feel in the air for a lot of us up here, and what would that look like up here? How would we handle an event like that if we had catastrophic wildfire? And I remember at that time, Brian reaching out pretty intensively to local agencies, our emergency responses at the town, the fire, sort of defining what our roles would be in these sorts of situations. It took some doing. It took a lot of meetings. I remember that first year just being really, we needed a lot of clarity. We needed to create the clarity, and we all did that together, not just the PUD, but the PUD with the town, with the fire, with the police, with the state, with FEMA, like all of these entities, all the way down to us little tiny special districts, pulling our weight on those sorts of conversations and collaborating and successfully navigating through a little emergency right in the middle of Truckee, which I know, freaked all of us out. And then, of course, we had later in the evening, NV Energy did de-energize the power to Truckee, and that was also for a shorter period of time, and I learned some things through that event. So we'll continue to keep expanding our understanding of the moment that we are in, and the I don't want to say the dangers, but, we live in an interesting moment. So let's keep doing what we're doing, continue to be prepared, to continue to practice, continue to plan, and keep our community safe and communicating. So thank you very much. That was the CCC meeting.
Awesome. All right. Okay, now we're on to department updates.
Make sure everything's working here first. Members of the board and members of the public, my name is Chad Reed, and I'm going to present for the Water Department today. We're going to start off with some of the demand that we've been seeing, where we're seeing a little bit higher than that of 2023. This is a chart that we're trying to become more standard that we use every single time, so as to make, so that you guys are able to just at a quick glance see what is going on. It's not real shocking that 24 is a little bit higher than that as 23 with regards to the snowfall we've seen. We've seen the ambient temperatures. We've seen different things of that nature. However, the one that is interesting is when we compare it to the running 3-year average, we are below that, and that's a great thing. Obviously, with the California Conservation Way of Life coming up and different things of that nature, as well as the aggressive capital projects that we've been doing, going after leaks and the pipe replacement, we're glad to see that that demand is down. However, it is just up from a little bit of that of 23. Something that's come to our attention, and last month, General Manager Wright was able to quickly do a little bit of a synopsis on this leak out there it's in the intersection of Rainbow and Highway 89. So we've had some customers call in about this, but I'd like to just take a second and talk about why this repair is going to be a little bit more complex. It'll probably be about 2 minutes, and I will still stay underneath my 5-minute mark here. So this leak it crosses that of 89, and we cannot impede the traffic on 89, and that would be taking it out in one lane or closure or anything of that nature. So for that reason, the traffic constraints have added some real challenges to repairing this. There is a casing that's on this. However, back when this casing was put in, it's approximately 200 feet across, and if you've been in that intersection, you'll notice that's right in the middle of a road cut. So if you were to draw an imaginary line straight into that hill, you'd be about approximately 30 feet deep at that casing, which would be a very significant excavation to be able to open that up and go. So the depth of this casing has also added some significant problems. The last two bullets, I'm going to talk a little bit about on this next slide, but I just want to say this pipe is extremely critical. So we're doing everything we can to expedite the repairs. However, it's proven to be very difficult because we don't know exactly where in the casing that leak is. Because when you're inside of a casing, when you have a leak, it's going to go to the path of least resistance. And so we know where it's coming out of the casing, but we're not able to say exactly where it is, which leads us to this next slide. So what I'm going to call light blue-ish color, not the purple. So I'm keeping it very simple. If people are more color savvy than I am, you can call them different names. But the light blue zone that we're talking about here is fed by the Prosser Annex, or by a higher zone. So this pipe is currently, that is crossing 89 there, that you'd see is close to what looks like a lock there, is the only source of water that feeds that entire upper area of Prosser Lakeview Estates. And so it's something that we are we're expediting the repair, and in the staff report, we talked about some different options, or not staff report, excuse me, department update. We talked about some different repair opportunities. So as you recall, we did a repair when we went underneath Interstate 80 about a year and a half ago. And we're looking at using something similar to that. However, that line we could shut down. If we were to shut this line down for a week, I think we'd have some unhappy customers with no water for over a week. So this is something that we're looking at a lot of different options. We're going to be bringing things to you as quick as we possibly can. We're waiting on some reports. We're waiting on things to come in. And at this point, we're all keeping our fingers crossed that leak does not get any worse over this next little bit. Capital projects, ski run tank is one of them that we're proud of. We're excited for the coating. They've moved on to the coating phase of this, and it is coming along great. It should be done this season, and we're hoping as long as weather holds out and we don't get some freak snowstorms or something, they are moved on to the coating system. And I believe that is it. Thank you.
Thanks.
The boys are out there right now, aren't they?
I beg your pardon?
I thought the boys went out there they're out there right now.
I'm sorry, at ski run or
Pardon?
where at?
Aren't they at that location? Rainbow, yeah.
Oh, they are not there the staff is not there right at this very minute. They've been out there several times though, and you might have saw them out there potholing. And I'll just really fast, when they potholed on that east side of the road right there, they were at about 17 feet deep. So the amount of shoring and what you're talking about, and to open that up, it's very problematic. So it's something that we're going to be trying to do a fine balancing of keeping people in water, yet at the same time get this
Because I
leak.
was coming in the building, there was 2 trucks going out to,
Oh, I don't know. That could have been a different group.
Oh,
I say, sorry, I don't know which one it is,
I'm sorry.
Director Aguirre.
that's okay. Thank you.
Good evening, President Bender, members of the board. I'm Jared Carpenter, Electric Utility Director. Mine's pretty short tonight, so I kind of just did one slide with a quick kind of snapshot of our power supply from July. It's kind of the unofficial one, but gives an idea of where things were, where the energy came from, sources. As Director Finn mentioned, on 8/11, we did have one major outage, which was NV Energy shutting down the power supply from that fire down in Verde that took out our power from about 7:30 p.m. to about 10:30 p.m. at night. All things considered, it actually went quite smoothly and just fine, all things considered. So the earlier fire in the day didn't have any power issues, but we saw no threat, no issues to be concerned about. So I'm happy to get into any questions on that, but that's the whole story of that outage.
All right, thank you.
Good evening, members of the board and members of the public. I'm Jillian Stewart, HR and Risk Director. This month's event recap that we wanted to highlight was maybe even the highlight of the year. It was that the end of our softball season. As I have teased about up here before, is last season, our first season, we only won one game the entire season. And I am happy to report we made it to the playoffs. Ended in 3rd place for the season with a 5-7 record. So we're pretty excited about it. Next slide. And next up, we have some really exciting core value recognition winners. So these are a little bit lengthy because they were kind of special events that happened. So I'm going to read through them because they deserve kind of the attention of the efforts that our staff put in. So the first winner is Linda Pendleton. She's our conservation specialist, and she won for accountability this month. Linda was hosting our induction cooking workshops, and the first one that this she was recognized for went off without a hitch. It can be hard to appreciate just how much hard work went into making it look so effortless, and especially with her picture there that was snapped from the first event, it's a perfect picture for the event. Linda took on a number of tasks for this project that are outside of her everyday duties, but she took each challenge head on. She researched the equipment they needed, learned how to cook on it, worked with Pano, another staff member, to select and learn a recipe she could teach the class, worked with 4 different venues on logistics and coordination, shopped, prepped, and portioned all the ingredients out, and was the MC of the event, teaching the cooking class to a large group interested in learning about induction technology. This event was many months in the making, and Linda delivered on every task that was asked of her. She worked collaboratively with other departments, whether it was working with the community committee to review logistical concerns and seek out advice, or working with the communications department to market the event. She even communicated individually with each participant ahead of the event. Linda really showed accountability in tackling this monstrous task. Jennifer Mason, our accounting specialist lead, won for timeliness. Jennifer's amazing timeliness skills were pushed to the limits this past month, but yet again, she amazed us all. Jennifer had to manage and/or support several time-sensitive projects, including audits with our benefits provider, a CalPERS audit, compensation and organizational assessment survey, information and data collection, a surprise Department of Transportation audit, and supported our district/family day event, all while being down a person in her department. So thank you, Jennifer. And last up, we have Ryan Purcell, our vegetation program manager. He won for communication. The district recently hosted a stop on NCPA's annual legislative staff tour, which brought a group of 40 state and federal legislative staffers to Truckee. We wanted to spend part of the group's time in Truckee out in the field, showing them the vegetation work that's critical for utilities in our area. Ryan led the planning for this piece of the tour. Ryan selected a work site that would be unique yet easily accessible. It was in cross-country terrain, so it's not the everyday work the staffers are going to see on the side of the street in a neighborhood. He also chose a site that would allow him to show off different aspects of vegetation management program. The district had to cut a new road in to access this area, which the staffers found really interesting. And there was multiple trees coming down, one that was clearly dead, but another that looked like it could have been healthy. So it was a great opportunity to explain how this was still a hazard tree, even if it didn't appear to be that way. Ryan communicated with the tree crew in time to work perfectly with the arrival of the tour group. Even when the group got off schedule, he was in contact with them. When they arrived on site, Ryan met the group at the bus, gathered everyone to talk about some of the key points of the program, led the group to watch the work. The area was clearly marked so the staff knew where to stand safe, which was a smart thing to do with such a large group. He answered many questions and showed off his expert knowledge in the field and how utilities on the ground are best resource for understanding these issues. Several staffers and NCPA reps said that the field tour was one of the most impactful sessions of their 4-day event. The success of Ryan's demonstration will go a long way to keep us in mind in Sacramento and DC while we're lobbying for funds, laws, and regulations dealing with wildfire mitigation. So well done, Ryan. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good evening, President Bender and members of the board. Stephen Poncelet, PIO and Strategic Affairs. Can't not lead off with Joe's ceremony. What a great event. Water utility killed it with the layout and the preparation. All the staff that supported the event and putting it together. We had attendees from town agencies. We had attendees from Joe's family, friends, the board, a lot of staff. So really a great event. We had our professional photographer there, and we got some really good pictures. I was able to give Joe, Director Aguirre, a thumb drive of all those today. And we are preparing a press release to go out with some of the best pictures. Worked with Director Aguirre on the quote today, so that'll be coming out soon. So the past fire and the Gold Ranch fire, that was a big day for us. And, you know, we're all debriefing on what happened and how did we get information and who got it and who shared it and how did we get it done. And there's room to improve there, but at the end of the day, everybody who needed to know knew. Operations responded very quickly, and, you know, water utility had everything topped off almost immediately. Electric was mobilized and dispatched to do that, and we started communicating during the past fire, which isn't an outage situation, but we were concerned about the potential of an NV de-energization due to the past fire, and we were able to warn our customers that, hey, that might happen. And while it did happen for another reason, when it happened because of the Gold Ranch fire later, I think our customers were on notice. We got a lot of positive feedbacks, a lot of forwards, a lot of kudos for the communication on that event. The next day was a red flag warning, and so we again kept the be on alert. And again, nothing happened the second day, but people were very thankful for the timely communication. And that's some of the stuff. That's a picture I took. It's a video, actually, from the top of Sierra Meadows, because I was across the hill watching this. And that was kind of where that video, I think we put it on Instagram, and I think 800 people reacted to it. You know, it's cool, but obviously the safety, the emergency response, and the collaboration is the story. And then another thing, we collaborated with Truckee Fire. We were approached by the North Shore Donner Lake group that wanted to start a Firewise community. And one exists on the other Donner Lake neighborhoods, but not on the North Shore. And they came asking for help because they were having a hard time communicating, getting the word out, getting traction. So obviously, that's an important environmental asset, Donner Lake. We want to protect it. And obviously, keeping fire away from our electric and water infrastructure has a lot of value to us. So we collaborated with Truckee Fire, and we helped them craft an email that we sent out on their behalf, targeted to those neighborhoods, to let those people know that this Firewise activity was happening. And they got 30 signups the night we sent the email, and they were very happy with our support and their effort. So. And that's it.
No updates this evening from IT. Everything's firing on all cylinders. Our CFO, Administrative Services Director, Mike Salmon's out on well-deserved vacation, so I'll step in and give some updates that I think are important or at least exciting here for staff. We recently sent out the promotion and launched the time of use rates that started earlier in August, so just last month. Initial inquiries were pretty high. We had approximately 100 customers with, doing inquiries and reach out to our advertisement and launch, and 25% of them are enrolling. So, it's kind of not necessarily a pilot program, but it's our initial swing at a time of use rate, and we'll evaluate and bring back to this board some of the performance metrics. And if we need to make adjustments to those or expand it, we'll present it up to the board for consideration. Staff is actively researching and investing in an investment solution designed for California public agencies called the Cal Cooperative Liquid Asset Security System, more affectionately known as the CLASS investment program. This came out of some of our workshops at the General Manager Summit with the California Special Districts Association. Some of our local Tahoe special districts had some success with it, so we're evaluating it, and it looks like it's a great opportunity for the district's financial investments in the future. Well, it's something we will bring back to the board for consideration in the October meeting. And then here's a little bit of small success we had last, I think it was in June, for some local construction projects. The NV Energy's Truckee sub, or feed to our Truckee sub, was de-energized due to some construction in the close proximity to their substation. And that created some shifting where we had to kind of reroute load management for our distribution and transmission systems. And the due diligence of our staff internally found a billing error with NV Energy, and so we're happy to report a little success there that we had a power cost adjustment that we approved last quarter. This find will be applied to the next power cost adjustment. So even after we do the power cost adjustments, we're still investigating final billing and meter metrics. And so this is a example of kind of that due diligence, and we'll bring back to the board in the next quarter. Some performance metrics with our staff and customer service, kind of year-to-date analysis, 2024 to 2023, new construction applications. While, it appears like there's a lot going on, most of that seems to be in the civil infrastructure, roads, utilities, things like that. New construction applications are actually down by 33% compared to last year. We've had an uptick in panel upgrades. There's a lot of drivers with that, with EV purchases, solar panel purchases, things like that. We would imagine even electronic appliances and things of that nature. New accounts created, residential are up 12%, while commercial are down. Commercials, I believe up 260%. It's 21, it's not a lot, so it's kind of relative there. I believe that's an up statistic. Solar accounts initiated, 18, down by 18%. Small residential projects up 33%. And then the closeout of work orders down 8%. That's not a reflection on staff performance. That's just kind of on some of these projects that are taking longer into the summer or into multiple seasons. Some of that driven by supply chain issues and things that we're experiencing ourselves. General services, facility maintenance. This is kind of an overview of some of the projects that have been presented to the board, kind of given on milestones of where we're at. The stucco repair, the building frontage is complete. It does require, I believe, a final inspection and sign off by the town, but that project was approved by the board in the spring. That was finished on time and under budget. The East Wing office remodel, you can see some of the construction out in the lobby. It's in progress, on time, kind of expecting a finish date end of October. Facilities master plan, we're working with JK Architecture, continue to work with some of our other public agencies to do tours on lessons learned with their facilities and see where they've had some successes or things that they might have done differently, considering our climate, weather, and the equipment we operate. Some other projects there that I won't go through all of them, just regular capital maintenance. Then in fleet, there's a couple of projects to give update on. The district has received and commissioned 2 of our electric vehicle EV Chevy Silverado pickup trucks. One of them has the flashy kind of vehicle wrap or logos. Our signage is charging forward. That's the messaging with our EVs. We've incorporated that into some of our actual maintenance fleet and looking, kind of assessing the effectiveness of those for future pool vehicles and other small light fleet. And then our DOT inspections, they don't happen on a frequent basis, but every once in a while we have DOT CHP inspections. Happy to report that we were successful with no violations or citations. This is reflective of all the work our fleet and risk prevention officers do here at the district and making sure that we're in compliance with that reporting. I did, before we cut away to some of the main agenda items, there were some comments, Vice President Finn and some of the staff updates about the successes of the emergency response and operations to both the Pass fire and the Gold Ranch fire. I wanted to also recognize some of the groundwork that was set up ahead of time. And that's, Vice President Finn was talking about communication early on. And, over the last 6 months, we've spent a lot of time building that framework and groundwork with local fire protection districts. And more importantly, or just as important, we spent a lot of time with NV Energy, and that hadn't been the case in the past. And so we were down in their offices, meeting face-to-face with their disaster preparedness and emergency response teams. So they were fully transparent as an investor-owned public utility or investor-owned utility down in Nevada that we're dependent upon in our transmission. Full transparency with that group on what their protocols were going to be to mitigate their financial and infrastructure risk in the event of a fire. So want to thank their team, Jesse Murray down there, and our team who have been working to collaborate and build those relationships. So part of that success is communication and relationships ahead of time. So we did conduct a debrief internally. While it was never a Truckee Donner PUD incident, we did do a debrief to see what some of the lessons learned were in communication, available resources, some staff not fully understanding what the next steps were or what responsibilities were. And so in October, we're going to be completing or continuing with our emergency operation planning training internally, a full district-wide staff training that also includes the communication architecture of SEMS and NEMS. Really important. So these are national emergency communications protocols that fire, both federal, state, and local fire agencies use, police agencies use, so that we're all speaking the same language, and we use emergency incident command infrastructure regardless of the size of the incident. And so that was really kind of revealed itself in our debrief. So we're excited about that. But as Jared said, and I think some of the board has already said, great successes out of the staff's response, considering it happened on a weekend when no one was here, red flag events. So we were happy with that. I'll end there.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. We have a hefty consent calendar tonight. We have items 8 through 15, and it appears number 11. I've got a real property interest in Gray's Crossing, so I'm going to have to recuse myself on that one. And then, is there any public comment on any of the consent items tonight? All right, seeing none, we'll close public comment. Any questions from the board?
There's 15 items, there's 13 resolutions.
Right. So signing off on a lot of good work.
Well, I just, pointing out that a lot of this has been before us. Like, we have seen all of these resolutions, just not in their completed form. So this isn't like we're approving this hefty consent calendar. We've got a lot of familiarity with all of these things.
All right, seeing none, and then is there a
I
motion?
move we approve the consent calendar.
Okay, we have a motion,
I second.
and Joe seconds. Steve?
With your recusal on item 11,
Yes.
you can stay on the dais and still vote and have the minutes reflect your recusal.
Got it. All right, roll call, please.
Director Aguirre?
Yes.
Director Harris?
Yes.
Director Laliotis?
Yes.
Vice President Finn?
Yes.
President Bender?
Yes, with recusal on 11, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great, okay. That's it for the consent calendar, so we're going to pop item number 17, California Leg and Reg update by our friends at CMUA.
All right. We'll wait for the slides to get up there, but in the meantime, good evening, President Bender, members of the board. My name is Derek Dolphy, and I am with my colleagues tonight, both in the room and virtually. We're here on behalf of the California Municipal Utilities Association, so we're very happy to give you a presentation on both a wrap-up of legislative year and some regulatory issues as well. So we'll get into the slides when we get them up here in just a second. But essentially what we're going to do is I'll give a quick introduction, tell you a little bit about CMUA, about 1 minute, and then I'll hand it over to my colleagues to do their water legislative and regulatory update. Then we'll come back to me and I'll do the energy legislative, and then we'll end with my colleague Frank Harris, who will do the energy regulatory update.
All right, Derek, I'll just interrupt you for a second.
Oh, your mic, Stephen. There we go.
There we go. I'll just interrupt for a second, kick it off. I do want to introduce Derek Dolphy, who does legislative energy work for CMUA. Frank Harris is in the office, does energy regulatory work. And then we have joining us via Zoom, Andrea Abergel, who does water regulatory work, and Danielle Blassett, who does legislative water work. So those are the 4 topics, and you'll see them pass between those. Just wanted to give a tiny bit of history on CMUA. They've been a valuable joint action agency and partner for many years. Their membership includes all 50, I believe, public powers in California, so north and south together, and then hundreds of public water utilities. Very active in Sacramento and in serving the CMUA membership. They've partnered with the district in promoting affordability, reliability, and sustainability, and working with California regulators and legislators to educate a lot so that they understand what's in front of them, and then represent the interests of CMUA's members and the communities that we serve. And so they're here tonight to provide this update, and really appreciate them coming out here. And I will drop this down and pull up Derek's slide.
Thank you, Stephen.
And it's a PDF, so it's going to look a little different, but there you go.
Perfect. All right, so just go down one there, Stephen, please. All right, so that was a wonderful introduction. You stole a little bit of our thunder there, but that's good. That'll move things right along. So like I said, we're going to start with water, we'll end with energy, and we'll throw in some of our 2025 predictions for legislation for next year. So one scoot down there, please. So yeah, Stephen did a great job of kind of giving you an overview of CMUA and who we are. Obviously, we're here to make sure that you're well represented in Sacramento, both regulatory and legislatively, and so that is really our main function, is to make sure that the public utility voice is heard in all different issues related to public power and water and wastewater in California. So scoot down. And just a couple quick by the numbers, we've tracked at least 90, probably a little bit more than that, bills on the energy side, 50-plus bills on the water side, and engaged on 30-plus bills on what we call water energy nexus, so things that affect utilities writ large, not specifically water or power. So each legislator gets to introduce 50 bills a year, so there's about 2,000 bills that get introduced, so there's lots of things to talk about. So. All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Danielle Blassett-Hayden to do the water legislation update. So Danielle, take it away.
Great, thank you so much, and my apologies for not being able to be with you in person. It's always a joy to come up and visit the great area that Truckee Donner serves. Just really quickly on the water side, it has been a lot to talk about in 2024, but most notably, CMUA has a co-sponsored bill, SB 366, that would establish long-term water supply targets. That bill is on the governor's desk. We're very excited about it, and we hope that the governor will sign it soon. There are a few big water bills that went through the process this year, or in a couple of cases did not go through the process. One that did not make it through was a proposal to establish a locally administered and locally funded water rate assistance program for low-income customers. So there's a lot of nuance and complications related to this proposal, but just know it would end up being a process where there would be a voluntary contribution on each ratepayer's bill that would then be used to fund low-income ratepayer offsets for bills in the service area. So it would be something that Truckee Donner would administer if it were to come to fruition. It did die this year, but we are, as we'll talk a little bit about in the predictions, expecting something to come back in 2025. And then just a couple other quick notes on fees. This was the year of developers trying to come after connection and capacity charges, and also utility fees on the electric side. We were able to neutralize almost all of those bills. One of them had some late-breaking hostile amendments that we are requesting a veto for. And then Proposition 4 will be on the November ballot. It is the $10 billion climate resilience bond with about $4 billion or so for water projects. So hopefully that's something that the district can avail itself of. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Andrea.
Thank you, Danielle, and good evening. It's always a pleasure to be back in front of Truckee Donner's board and to present here. Sorry, apologies myself, not able to have made it up there today, but thank you for having us participate virtually. On the water regulatory matters, I wanted to just highlight 4 points, 4 items that are either completed or ongoing or something we'll see in the near future. Through the state water board. So the first kind of big item, say it lightly because it's been honestly years in the making, is the Making Conservation a California Way of Life. The state water board officially adopted that regulation package in July. Definitely took many years to get here, and the final regulations are expected to be effective January 1st, 2025. So the regulations put in place an outdoor residential water use standard, a commercial, industrial, and institutional water use standard, performance measures, and reporting requirements that public water suppliers in California will be expected to meet. The standards themselves are actually part of an overall water use objective. It's a budget that includes indoor residential water and water loss standards that were adopted previously either through the state water board regulatory process or through legislation. So the outdoor residential and CII standard implementations of the standards within the budget, they're on a staggered schedule. The first standard reduction, aside from the implementation date, is 2035. So the next expected action or big drop is you have about 10 years to get there. And then again, that standard drops in 2040. That was something that CMUA, along with other fellow associations and water agencies, successfully negotiated, was to give additional time for that compliance. And the State Water Board gave that to us in this scope of 5 years. So in addition to the standards in place, there are variances that were adopted that would alter the overall budget depending on the variance that you apply for and how that kind of plays into it. So for example, there's a seasonal population budget adjustment that could be included in your budget, and that would be very applicable to the Truckee Donner community. So now that these regulations are in place and all eyes are turning towards implementation, there are a ton of resources that are available through other associations, and CMUA will also get involved in that to help water suppliers kind of navigate this over time. A big issue that we identified early on with the water board and continued to point out is the lack of accurate data and how data adjustments over time need to be made and considered to either reduce or change or alter the standards and the budget itself to allow water suppliers to get to successful implementation. So stay tuned. We know that you all have been working pretty diligently on this. Another item, and this is actually a water energy nexus item, but it is something that I'm staffing and happening at the water board. So I'm going to present it during this topic. It's actually a regulatory process. The water board is adopting a general order. It's a permitting scheme that is applicable to electric utilities. So a water agency electric utility application. The permitting scheme is for utility wildfire related activities, and the intent is to serve as an expedited permit for activities that may have or actually impact waters of the state. That is the stated intent. However, we're seeing that the scope of this general order is actually very expansive, and it includes a lot of maintenance activities that currently do not trigger a state water board permit on its own. Additionally, the application of the permit includes some urban areas that are designated as high fire threat districts, which kind of defeats the purpose of looking at rural areas that might actually have those impacts to waters and you know, where we would expect this to be included. So we have been working on this for a couple years now. We're currently in public comment with the water board. Those comments are due at the end of next week. The board is expected to adopt sometime in February. We, along with NCPA and SCAPA, fellow associations on public power, and the IOUs have identified a lot of these issues in terms of the expansive scope placing onerous administrative burdens on electric utilities. And so we're working together to provide some comprehensive suggestion to dramatically limit the scope of the general order. The third item I wanted to touch on is the lead and copper rule inventory requirements. This is the US EPA lead and copper rule revisions, which were adopted back in 2020, I believe, that established a requirement for water suppliers to complete a full inventory of their service lines, both owned by the supplier and also on the customer side. That inventory is due by October 16th, 2024, so rapidly approaching. The EPA has released and worked on official guidance documents to assist water suppliers throughout the nation with completing this requirement. And then on the state side, CMUA and other associations and other water agencies, we worked with the State Water Board to compile a water industry guidance document on how the State Water Board is going to be monitoring and performing their checks on this inventory. So the methods and practices that are acceptable on the state side are further refined in those guidance documents. And just a last note that EPA is finalizing their lead and copper rule improvements. That is the updated rule to the revisions, and those went through a public comment period. They're expected to be finalized by October 2024. That revised rule still includes the inventory requirement, and with the same due date of October 16, 2024. However, the difference is that it labels that as an initial inventory, and then suppliers are thereafter required to continually update this inventory with updated information. The last note I have on here, and I labeled it as PFAS, but this is water quality in general. It's what we're looking for in the future with the State Water Board. Now, the Water Board has completed some big water quality regulations. The maximum contaminant level for hexavalent chromium was adopted earlier this year. They've been turning towards PFAS and how to implement the EPA maximum contaminant level on the state side. Beyond that, the State Water Board is looking at regulating arsenic, which I know is of concern in your area. But first, they're working on PFAS, so any type of arsenic regulation, maximum contaminant level is not going to be expected for at least another year or two. So that is all that I have. I'm going to kick it back over to Derek.
All right, thank you, Andrea. So a couple bills to note for energy this year. There was three main topics I want to talk about today, which is hydrogen, energy affordability, and of course wildfire mitigation. Those are three things that I think are very relevant to us on the electricity side. So first up, there's three different bills I want to mention, kind of all in the same breath related to hydrogen. Assemblymember Bennett, who is the chair of an Assembly Select Committee on Hydrogen, introduced last year, and it died this year, which was AB 1550. He also introduced a very similar bill after that bill died called AB 2204. All of what these bills are trying to do is define what is considered green hydrogen for a renewable portfolio standard requirements to be clean energy. It was very contentious. You had a lot of hydrogen and utility folks on one side, a lot of environmentalists on the other, to really try and make sure that we understand what can be considered green and what can't be considered green when it comes to hydrogen energy projects. So those bills had a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, but did not move forward. The one hydrogen bill that did move forward this year was SB 1420 by Senator Caballero. She's also the chair of the Appropriations Committee, so she's very powerful in the state Senate. What this bill does is it would essentially add certain types of hydrogen projects to the list of eligible projects for existing what's called AB 205 permit streamlining for CEQA. So it's really trying to allow certain types of hydrogen projects to get a little bit more of a CEQA bump and go through that permitting process faster. So that bill did make it across the finish line. It is now on Governor Newsom's desk. So a lot of discussion on hydrogen. We'll get into that on our last slide about predictions for next year, but this is certainly not an issue that will be going away. The next two bills I want to talk about are from Assemblymember Petrie Norris. She is the chair of the Assembly Utilities and Energy Committee, so another very important, very powerful person on energy in the state legislature. She introduced both of these bills at the very end of session through what they call a gut and amend, which means they take a bill that was something else and they dump new language in it at the last minute. So both of these bills came out within the last week of session, so not a lot of discussion and debate related to them, but I do think it's indicative of what the Assembly is trying to do on energy affordability. The first one is AB 3121. What this one tried to do was essentially claw back certain types of incentive program funding from investor-owned utility customers from their bills to try and give them a one-time credit back to their bills to help lower those electricity bills. So what it would do is it would take money away from projects like SGIP, which is the Self-Generation Incentive Program, multifamily solar incentive, and a school energy efficiency incentive program, take that money back and then redistribute it to their IOU customers. That bill ran into a whole host of opposition from clean energy, environmental justice groups. So that bill, it popped up and then it immediately went away. So that one did not cross the finish line this year, but it does show that Assemblymember Petrie Norris is serious about trying to come up with ideas on how to lower customer bills for IOU customers. The second bill I'll mention is AB 3264. This one did pass and it is pending on Governor Newsom's desk. What this one does is it will direct the CPUC to do two different things. The first one is to require the CPUC to conduct a study to be completed by July 1st of next year of proposals to reduce the cost to ratepayers for expanding the state's electrical transmission grid to achieve the state's clean energy goals. So really trying to lay that foundation of data and information on what are the costs going to be related to upgrading our transmission grid. And then the second thing it does is it directs the CPUC to develop a framework for assessing, tracking, and analyzing total annual costs paid by residential households in California for IOU customers by December 31st of 2026. So like I said, Assemblymember Petrie Norris is very locked in. The Assembly is very focused this year on energy affordability, and they certainly have their eyes and ears open on how they can do that. This year it's been focused on IOU customers, hasn't been focused on POUs, but certainly something that we're paying extremely close attention to. The last thing I will mention before I turn it over to my colleague Frank Harris to give a regulatory update is SB 1003 by Senator Dodd. He's been a champion for wildfire issues for many years. I'm sure we've all talked about his legislation over the years. Really what this bill did, and it was another late gut amend coming out of the governor's office, really what it was trying to do is essentially put a lot of different requirements and considerations on IOUs when they submit their wildfire mitigation plans to make sure that they are looking at the most cost-effective means of implementing their wildfire mitigation actions and not just doing whatever they want, but really making sure that it's cost-effective and not driving up the cost of electricity for their ratepayers. That bill also would have afforded additional flexibility to the California Wildfire Safety Advisory Board for publicly owned electric utilities to submit our wildfire mitigation plans to them at least once every 4 years versus how it is right now, which is annually. So CMUA did support that bill for that added flexibility. However, that bill, because it was a late gut amend and there was a lot going on at the end of session, it got lost in the shuffle and that did not pass. So that will not be happening this year. But I imagine that a big change like this to try and make investor-owned utilities really look at the fiscal aspects of wildfire mitigation plans, I think will be coming back next year. So I'm going to pass the microphone over to Frank Harris.
That's great. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, President Bender, members of the board, the community. Thank you for allowing us to come up and meet with you tonight. My name is Frank Harris. I work on regulatory issues in the energy space. So I'm going to speak about 3 regulations that are already in existence that the California Air Resources Board is looking to modify. And the first one is the Advanced Clean Fleets Rule. This is the rule that requires that public agencies begin purchasing zero-emission vehicles for their medium and heavy-duty fleets. Truckee will be obligated under this rule beginning in 2027, wherein Truckee will have to begin to purchase all of their medium and heavy-duty vehicles, this is Class 2B and above, as zero-emission vehicles or plug-in hybrids if there is an option. There were a couple of elements in this regulation that we didn't like. There were a number of elements we didn't like. And so last year we sponsored a bill, Assembly Bill 1594, to address some of these issues related to flexibility of the rule. That bill was passed. And so right now the Air Resources Board is implementing a rulemaking to implement some of those provisions that are required under 1594. It requires that CARB work with public agency utilities to determine a vehicle end-of-life policy. It also requires that the public agency utilities be authorized to submit all relevant usage information for a daily usage exemption request. And it requires that CARB not rely solely on the lowest energy usage for determining whether a ZEV is available. Now, CARB is hosting a workshop on this on September 24th, and we'll obviously be participating. CARB did just issue a few changes to the regulation using a Section 100 provision in the California Code of Regulations to implement a few of the changes that are in 1594 that were non-discretionary. And we're, CMUA along with NCPA and SCAPA are going to be submitting a comment letter tomorrow, actually, on that. I was just reviewing the final document upstairs. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the cap and trade regulation. This is one that got a lot of attention a number of years ago. CARB is looking to update the cap and trade regulation to increase the program's stringency consistent with the 2022 scoping plan update. Key concerns we have with this are the possibility that POUs will have to consign for auction 100% of their allocated allowances. Could be a reduction in allowance allocation, we do expect that, and other general changes to the authorized use of allowance value on the part of POUs. We continue to work on this. We expect this to be put into a formal rulemaking early in 2025 with the changes impacting the program rules becoming effective Jan 1, 2026. The last regulation I want to talk about is low carbon fuel standard. This is another regulation that's in current existence. And CARB just issued a 15-day change package. Concerns that we have, we want to make sure that the verification requirements don't really impose costs that push POUs to not participate. Some of those costs can be very high for smaller POUs. Maybe they will just choose not to participate because it's just, the juice is not worth the squeeze. POU holdback credits, we don't want those to be adversely affected, by the potential changes. We want to see with a movement away from allocating base credits to the utility-run clean fuel rewards program that may be part of this change. We're concerned about continued CARB oversight. And then one that's very important to our members is that the LCFS should not require specific rate structures in order to receive base credits. That was a proposal as part of this package. So those are the three regulations. I do want to call a quick audible, if that's okay, in my 20 seconds left. One of the things that CMUA does is facilitate different educational events and conference events, and one of those is called the Annual Customer Engagement Summit. And this brings customer-facing program experts from all of our members together to talk about what they're doing, what they've done over the last year. This year, in about 10 days, Truckie's going to be hosting it. So I wanted to give a shout, you see, there you go. So I wanted to give a shout out to Stephen Keats, who's on the Truckee staff. He's doing a great job managing it as the chair of the planning committee this year, and wanted to make sure the board was aware of that. Thank you again. Let me hand it back to Derek.
All right, thank you so much. So wrapping up here on our last slide, we do have some 2025 predictions, and that is our crystal ball on the slide. We'll see how accurate it is at this point next year. I'm going to talk about the first three, and then Danielle's going to talk about the last two. So the first one, I think Frank just did a really great job of talking about it, which is cap and trade reauthorization. There's been a lot of chatter that the legislature wants to move early on reauthorizing cap and trade. We've seen in the last auction for cap and trade credits that they've started to go down. Folks are starting to feel that the market might be a little bit unstable, so the legislature wants to send a strong signal to the regulated market that this is going to be renewed. So most likely we'll see a big push on cap and trade reauthorization through legislation next year. Obviously, we'll be extremely engaged on that, both on the legislative and on the regulatory side. The second item, I think we touched on it quite a bit with Assemblymember Pucci-Norris's bill, but really it's heartening to see that the legislature this year has really taken to heart that energy affordability should be a priority. of theirs. And it's something that they've been talking quite a bit about. It's something that we remind them of almost every time we talk to them about a bill, is that we want to make sure we're keeping the rates low for our customers. So that is something I think we'll continue to see as a theme throughout all energy legislation next year, is energy affordability. And then lastly, legislation on the Pathways Initiative. This is the West-wide Pathways Initiative, trying to tie all the western states into one, grid under some sort of governance structure. I think we're going to see the beginnings of legislation on that next year. We don't know what that's going to look like, but certainly this group called the Pathways Initiative folks are working together on trying to see what steps they need to change in the law to make it so that California can start moving in that direction to kind of hooking all of our grid up to the western states. So with that, I'll turn it over to Danielle to finish out the slide.
Great, thank you. So the last two, for water low-income rate assistance legislation, we do expect that the sponsors of SB 1255, the bill I spoke about earlier, are going to return with some type of proposal. This is something where they've been working on water affordability for a very long time, trying different approaches, and this latest approach to do something on the local level, didn't pass this year, but definitely could come back next year. And then I know this isn't something that necessarily Truckee Donner gets too involved in, because I know you have a very special arrangement when it comes to your water supply. But there has been a lot of chatter about whether some additional legislation on water rights might come back in 2025. CMUA, along with other associations and stakeholders, were able to neutralize the bills that were introduced in 2023, but there definitely could be some action in that regard. So I think that concludes our presentation for today. We are happy to answer any questions you might have on any of the issues we brought up or anything else related to legislative and regulatory.
Thank you so much, CMUA team. I'm just going to do the formalities here and then pass it on for questions. There is no fiscal impact associated with this informational workshop item, and the recommendation is to receive this presentation and provide input to staff and CMUA. And with that, we'd be happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you, CMUA folks. And like to open this up for public comment, this workshop. Is there any public comment on CMUA's presentation? All right. Seeing none, we'll go into director comments or questions. All right, go for it.
Just a couple questions. I appreciate all the information that you guys have here. I know it's a lot of work to kind of stay on top of legislative matters. One question I have is, what does POU stand for?
Oh, sorry, publicly owned utility.
Okay,
So,
I figured it's something like that, but just sometimes the
Apologies for not
acronyms
clarifying.
I get kind of lost in. And then the other question I have is, just couple weeks ago, there was a Tesla semi that crashed on I-80 and closed it down for 12 hours plus. And I was wondering if if the legislators in Sacramento are kind of taking note that with all these electric vehicle requirements that are coming, down in a couple of years, are they taking into consideration if one crashes and has to close down a main thoroughfare over Donner Summit, because I heard that the fire department still doesn't quite have 100% handle on firefighting of these electric vehicles. And it's such a great idea to have electric vehicles, but I feel like the support behind it really needs to be mentioned in the legislation.
No, fantastic point, and certainly I think it was something that got a lot of play in Sacramento. It was definitely in a lot of the publications that us in the Capitol community were looking at, and people were discussing it. I can't speak for, if the legislature is going to act on it, but certainly I think that shows how important it is to have Truckee Donner and our publicly owned electric utility members' voices on this issue to kind of say, this is what it looks like, boots on the ground. This is how things are actually playing out, and I want to give a shout out to Truckee Donner for the what we had the presentation on earlier of the NCPA's staff tour. I think it was fantastic to bring the legislative staff here to be able to talk to them about how are we implementing these laws and what does it actually look like, because a lot of those folks don't necessarily understand all the particulars about, you know, okay, if an electric semi crashes, you can't really put it out, and how do we factor that into our plans and our implementation, both on the regulatory side and on the legislative side. So I think it's a great point, and certainly something that we're always trying to, you know, drill into the legislature, which is how do we implement it? How do we actually make this happen? So great point.
That's Tony.
Yeah, I just had a question. I know, I've been reading recently, I think CARB's putting together some kind of roadshow for ACF, and they've been highlighting manufacturers, vehicles. I just didn't know if CMUA has been involved in that, or if you've got any feedback from other members on, actually, I don't even know if that roadshow's happened yet, but on how that went, or what sort of success that was, or it wasn't.
Yes, thank you for the question. The Air Resources Board does put together these types of public roadshows, and they've had a few of them in the electric vehicle space. It's not something, it is something that involves more the manufacturers and the upfitters. What happens with these, the medium and heavy duty space, is that the chassis builder, and your fleet management team would be more familiar with this. The chassis builders build the chassis, and then the upfitters buy the chassis and put on the equipment that your professionals use. And so that's who gets involved in those road shows. We're very interested, and all of our members are very interested to see what vehicles are out there. Some of our members have bought certain ones as a pilot to provide feedback. And certainly, the goal of our interaction with CARB on the Advanced Clean Fleets rules to make sure that that flexibility continues to be available to our members, because you all don't get to tell your community that we can't get there because the truck's not charged. You don't get to tell them we can't respond to this emergency because we can't refuel the vehicles that we need. And so we need that flexibility to continue to be part of the ACF rule. So that's why we work on it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions on this side?
No, I think CMUA's got it covered pretty good. Yeah.
Echo that. I don't actually have a question, but I really appreciate all of the work that you all put in on our behalf. Obviously, this industry, electricity and water, is complex. Obviously, lawmaking is complex, and putting them both together is, I admire what you do. So thank you. Thank you for that, and thank you for bringing it to us in a way that gives us more tools for asking the right questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, really appreciate being a member. So,
Feedback. Let's stay members.
yes.
I've been a member then for 100 years.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Okay, now, so we're back on to item number 16. We've got our folks, UAMPS, here tonight with us. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good evening. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you all. President Bender, rest of the board, the public. My name is Mason Baker. I am the CEO for UAMPS, which stands for Utah Associated Municipal Power Systems. With me here tonight is Jackie Coombs, who just stood up. She's the Managing Director of Member Relations. Spends a lot of time with me going out, meeting with the members, does a lot of the interface that we have with the 50 members that are currently in our organization. We do have a presentation put together for y'all. I'd love to keep it somewhat informal, but if we want to go through the more formal process and leave it towards the end, I'm good with that, but I don't know if there's a standard protocol that has to be followed. So
Jared, I'm guessing you might have a little kickoff for us, or no?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. All good.
Jumping into it.
I do, but,
It's not loading.
yeah, okay, sorry. It's, yeah, it's the same thing as previous one, so it's a workshop item. And so we'll have a more of a closeout with the same recommendation and the no fiscal impact. But as Mason already introduced himself, and you, they come here every year and been around for a long time with us, and we've been a long-standing member amongst one of the 50 members of UAMPS covering 7 states. Essentially, they're handling our power supply and power scheduling and power generation things. So the only thing we don't work with them quite as much as their other members are the legal and legislative sort of things, regulatory sort of things. But CMUA is one of the members that helps us with that. So this is more around power generation and power supply. So take it away, Mason. Thanks.
Thanks, Jared. And yes, please, questions as we go. So if you can go to the next slide, Jared. Just some quick background on UAMPS. Jared already spoke to this a little bit. We're a joint action agency. We started in Utah, been around for 44 years. We currently have 50 members in 7 western states. We're a not-for-profit electric utility. We focus on the wholesale side, serving our members' needs. A lot of that, and I'll get into the bulk of the presentation, we'll talk about developing new utility scale power projects. Just a little more insight on who we are organizationally. We currently have 55 employees. We have 14 of those 55 are at a natural gas combined cycle plant that we own and operate for the members, which Truckee participates in that facility. Then we have 1 individual at a wind farm that we own for the members. Y'all also participate in that project. And then 40 staff sort of at Salt Lake in the office there. Next slide, please. So this pie chart on the left, to give you a sense of all of the energy we used to serve the members' loads in 2023. And one thing that I should point out is under our structure, our members are allowed to pick which resource projects they participate in based on their community's desires. So a community like Truckee can, really decide within the UAMPS architecture that they want to meet California clean energy requirements, and they can do that through our platform. So what you're seeing here in this pie chart is UAMPS membership in the aggregate, and we'll have some later slides that show what Truckee's resource mix looks like that you guys use to serve the community here. So in 2023, 25% of our energy for the members came from hydro. I'm realizing that maybe my eyes aren't that good because these numbers seem a little far away from me. 15% was coal, 21% was natural gas. Talk a little bit about the trends we've been seeing. If we went back about 15 years ago, coal was a much bigger piece of this pie for us. This coal piece has been shrinking. We expect that it will continue to shrink. Natural gas has increased since 2008, largely driven by fracking, and we've seen more of our members install internal natural gas generation. We also, on this pie, have 30% coming from purchases, and what this means is a combination of daily wholesale market purchases as well as long-term market purchases. Those long-term market purchases are fixed. They don't have the pricing volatility, the pricing spikes that sometimes we'll have, especially during the summer months. Some of the pricing volatility over the last handful of years, as we've experienced, has crept into the winter months. So that's another sort of trend. Back in 2022, as I'm sure y'all are aware, we had a big spike in natural gas pricing, December of 2022, January of 23. Wind about 3%, solar about 3%. So solar is continuing to grow in our portfolio. On the right side is a list of all the generation projects and transmission projects, all the projects, for that matter, that we provide for the members. The projects that are in red font are projects that Truckee participates in. Next slide. So, in talking to Jared, Brian, about this presentation, I'm really going to focus in on some of the challenges that we're seeing in developing new utility scale generation and give a little deeper dive into that. So it is a real exciting time to be in this industry, because we're at a place now where we're fundamentally going to be rebuilding the majority of our infrastructure and expanding it. We're going to be building more transmission. We're going to be building more power generation. And I'm going to do my best to give you a sense of sort of the magnitude of that, because it is going to be incredibly challenging, but also maybe give a little more flavor as to, you know, why it does take us 5 to 7 years to build new generation. And that's a big change from where it used to be. So next slide. All right. And this is a bit of an eye chart that I'm glad I looked at it again before I got up here, because I definitely can't read it. But I'll walk us through it just so we can get a sense of kind of where we are. These numbers are looking at the entire U.S., and this actually came from Lawrence Berkeley Lab, came out with a really great study recently that looks at this particular problem in bringing on new generation. And what the problem is going through what we refer to as the interconnection process. And what this process really is each transmission area has a balancing authority, that's the term, and they have to go through this interconnection process that they administer whenever a new power generation facility is looking to site on their transmission system and put that generation onto the wholesale grid. And so they go through this interconnection process, and this is what this study is all about looking at, is what's going on in these interconnection processes domestically, what are the challenges, what can we learn from them, and hopefully make improvements. This is a huge area of discussion right now, trying to improve the interconnection process. But what I like about this study is that it has some graphs that gives you a sense of what the existing power generation capacity is domestically. And if you look on the left side of the chart, the first bar graph says 972 gigawatts. That is the capacity that we had in the U.S. in 2010. And you can see that a large portion of it is coal, and then it's gas, then nuclear is blue, or I think blue is actually hydro. Nuclear is red, and you can start to see, I think, a little bit of wind. And if you go just to the right, the next bar graph is the current existing generating capacity over the entire U.S. As of the end of 2023. So over the last 13 years, we've significantly increased our capacity by almost 300 gigawatts of capacity. And you can see some of the key movers in that. You've got coal shrinking, and then you've got solar and wind in particular coming on during that period of time. That's a significant amount of new capacity to have come on in the last 13 years. And then if we shift over to the right further, these two bar graphs are showing the interconnection queues. And so what the queue is just the folks, just when you've filed to put a new generator on the grid, you're in the queue. And so the first one shows total capacity at 462 gigawatts. And this is as of 2010. So that's what the queue looked like in 2010. And at that point in time, it was pretty orderly. You could go through this queue process in about 2 years. And then you go to the right, and you can see this massive graph. And we're north of, I think it's 2,500, I can't exactly read it, 2,600 gigawatts of projects that have just gone into the queue. And this is the problem. You've got this many projects in these queues that are going through and getting studied, and just to go through and study that many applications is incredibly challenging. And the other side of it, too, is a lot of it's speculative, to be frank. And it's noted here in the font that's pretty illegible by design. This was by design. I was trying not to make that legible. What it says is 14%, based on their previous analysis, only 14% of that 2,600 will actually go online. So that is not a very good success rate. And I bring it up, too, to put some context. As we look at developing new projects for the members, we have to keep in mind that a lot of projects aren't ever going to get over the finish line. But we still have a lot of need within our membership, and we need to move forward with diligencing a lot of projects. But this just gives a little more flavor of what's going on and one of the challenges in bringing on utility scale generation. I don't know if there are any questions on this one so far.
Yeah, I just had to do the math
Yeah.
there. I mean, that's 364 gigawatts, which is less than what was in the queue in 2010.
Yeah.
And so that queue, I'm assuming that queue in 2010, then you get a hit rate of maybe 80% or something, and that adds to the 972, right? So those projects hopefully went to fruition in 2010 in the queue to get us to the 1,279 currently.
Yeah.
And then, so we actually have less projects in the queue looking forward than we did 14 years ago, potentially, that are actually going to come to fruition, potentially.
Potentially. I mean, if their 14% is correct.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
Right. I mean, it's, their estimate at 14%, I don't know if that's the best hit rate of success. Do think that a reasonable takeaway is that sheer volume is creating a massive problem for us.
So this is a bureaucratic challenge, this particular part. The challenge of bringing on new generation. This part of it is more the review process, the looking at the plans, obviously there's a technical component because you're looking at plans, but does it fall sort of more on the bureaucratic end? Is it more of a technical problem, or is it?
It's definitely a mixed problem. I mean, the problem is they do have to go through a approved process to validate these applications, go through technical engineering studies associated with them, and they have to do it procedurally in the right way. If they don't, then they will get taken to the Federal Energy Regulatory Committee and get accused of discriminatory practices. But from a project development standpoint, most developers are very incented to go through this process and get through it, and then that project has a lot more value to it, having gone through this process and having an approved interconnection agreement with the balancing authority. So it's just there's definitely ways to streamline the process, and those streamlining efforts are underway. We're dealing with them some right now, and they are creating new burdens for us, for example, because we're not looking at submitting these applications based on a speculative profit earning basis. We actually want to develop the projects and move forward. But, for example, one of the projects we're looking at, we will now have to submit a $5 million letter of credit in January and then wait a year and find out how the transmission study gets completed. So, and they're doing that to take a lot of the speculators out of the process. But, that's maybe a negative consequence for us because that imposes a fair amount of financial burden to go through the process of setting up a letter of credit and doing that.
And these are all projects in the United States. This is
Correct.
from all the different balancing agencies. This is everything on a national scale.
That's
Okay.
correct, and it's a great report. I can provide the citation because it breaks it down into regions, so you can see what's going on in the West. California's got its own sliver, so you can see what the queue looks like in California.
One thing I could add to cover both those, keep in mind, if you go back 10 years ago, there weren't many projects in the queue that were like solar, but they're all kind of essentially big power plants. That's what we did for so long. Today, you have a lot of what's called small power plants. Even the biggest solar is not very big in terms of a nuclear plant or an old gas-fired plant from years and years ago. So in theory, the percentage should increase, but the challenge to get there is difficult. And kind of off Director Finn, it's something similar where, keep in mind, every project needs a transmission line to connect. But if let's say it's a solar project or a wind project, it's only going to put out power intermittently, but we need them, it's fine. But you still need the same transmission line. So if the cost of transmission line is almost like a sunk cost, a nonstop generator is great, but there aren't many of them on there. But if there's solar, you have to have a lot more of them, and you're going to need a matching generator just to keep the total amount needed to supply the grid to the United States pretty consistent.
One more question. Is there a size component to this, like how big the project is or how small? Do smaller projects fall into this queue?
Smaller projects generally would not have to go through. This queue is looking at the large generator interconnection process, but so anything, it depends on the balancing area. It differs between balancing areas, but anything that we would be looking to do for the members in an aggregate basis would go through this process.
Okay, yeah. I guess it's shifted a little bit to Truckee specific. If we were going to do something like a local solar situation, would it fall into this queue? And we're still in the same position.
It should not.
It probably wouldn't. Anything here we did that was large for Truckee probably wouldn't even hit this. It just wouldn't be very big for
Comparatively.
this scale.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of all of our options at Truckee. Thank you.
We'd want to try to keep it off that queue, frankly, if at all possible.
That's what I'm.
And that'd still be very big.
How do we get around the queue? How do we butt
Yeah.
mine?
Well, and that's a good question because it's something that some of our members have been doing to do more smaller projects within their communities. But then, of course, that you run into all different challenges then, right? Land use, et cetera. Next slide, please. So some other interesting things that are going on. I got this graphic from the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal has been religiously chronicling AI data center demands over the last year. It's been really interesting to watch because there's a tremendous amount of money going into AI data centers, and they require a lot of power, and it's having a big impact on our industry. There's a lot of data center growth in Utah, so it's been something that we've been monitoring. But this is sort of coming out of this series that they're doing. And what this graph is showing us is for the last 5-7 years, a big thing within our industry has been talking about planned retirements of fossil plants, coal and gas. And what's happened over the last couple of years is those planned retirements have been getting extended. And what this graph is showing us is that 36% of planned retirements have been extended. Some of those extensions have been for 5 years, a couple years, and then some of them are indefinite. And the factors and what these bubbles represent is the actual capacity, the size of those retirements. So they're pretty significant. And what's driving these retirement extensions? We've got load growth. That, you know, you can look at data centers. That's one big piece of it. You know, we all of a sudden, across the country, have started seeing load growth in a much more significant way than we have in the last 20 years. Second is grid reliability. Reliability regulators across the country are recognizing issues associated with, you know, transitioning the power generation fleet from predominantly thermal to thermal and renewables. And it's starting to cause some challenges and causing concerns about, is there going to be reliable, what we refer to as dispatchable capacity? So that's another issue. And then the third one is actually bringing on to the system replacement capacity, getting back to the first issue. So these are sort of the three factors that are pushing these retirement dates. And it looks like this trend will likely continue moving forward.
Mason, can you give a quick definition for our board and the community what dispatchable generation is?
Sure. Dispatchable generation is simply a power generator where our dispatch desk could call up and say, we need you to run. And that unit will be able to run subject to its availability. That's in contrast to, say, a solar facility, which we generally would refer to as non-dispatchable, because we obviously can't control when the sun shines. We can, you know, ramp, if you want to say that, some of the generation. You can curtail some of the generation. And that's a nice feature, but what we're generally talking about traditionally is being able to have it actually produce megawatt hours and put it on the grid. And if we went back to that previous chart that shows the interconnection queue, all of that, yeah, if you go to this one, you know, all the green and yellow shades, that's all non-dispatchable generation. So if you're a grid reliability coordinator and you see the interconnection queue that looks like that, you start raising your hand and say, I'm concerned about all these retirements because this is what we're processing. And that's...
Storage not considered dispatchable?
It is considered dispatchable, and I'll try to, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to stay off the acronyms. I'm going to restrain myself. But the interesting thing about batteries is they'll typically be paired with solar. And when you see solar and hybrid up there, it's like the mustard colored piece. They don't have the same reliability, dispatchability characteristics, say, of a gas plant. Especially once a system, if you think of, you know, the California Independent System Operator, the more solar you get on the system, the less reliability you will have towards batteries that are charged off of that. Because if you have them in a relatively constrained geographic location, then the reliability credit associated with the solar and the batteries is going to be less. And yeah, I know it's a little, yeah, and that's an interesting phenomenon because it's just, you know, you're just more exposed, if you will, from a risk standpoint to the solar, and it's in turn charging the batteries. So there is a reliability component associated with solar and batteries, and we measure that by a metric, effective load carrying capability. So there are metrics on that. California ISO has theirs, Pacific Corp has theirs, and that's all. These are all the things that we sort of have to balance when we look at the overall reliability of resources to serve the members' needs. We have to look at those underlying characteristics and sort of say, is that the best set of resources? So that's why dispatchability becomes incredibly important. Yeah. Yep. All right. All right, so turning to Truckee. So these are the resources that your community used in 2023. On the left side is by the UAMPS project designation. The right pie graph is by resource type, sort of more generalized towards wind, solar, natural gas. In 2023, pool, and the pool in this case is going to be more or less daily wholesale market purchases. It was 19%. Resources sold, because we do offer liquidity with our members through the project, the pool project, where if you guys, it's not uncommon for certain hours to be long on energy or short on energy, so you're able to sell it back to other UAMPS members. Horse Butte is the wind project, that was 20%. Nebo is the natural gas combined cycle plant, that was 11%. PX is a forward market transaction. There's a very small sliver of Pleasant Valley Wind. Veo is a waste heat facility, it's 5%. Red Mesa is the solar facility on the Navajo Reservation, that's 7%. Stampede Hydro is 2%. Truckee Carson Irrigation District is 7%. Landfill gas was 14%, and then you had some NV purchases for 6%. You shift over and you look at sort of overall resource mix by type. You see landfill gas 14%, natural gas 14%, purchases 28%, wind about 21%, waste heat I think that's 8, solar about 8 or 9, and then hydro about 9%. Overall, I mean, it's a pretty diverse set of resources. We do have other members that have much fewer resources. That's something that we've been pushing really heavily with our membership, is to have a nice set of resources that represent diversity, because the reality is, these resources can go down for outage, so it is good to have diversity. There can be weather events. We just want to make sure that our members have a nice, diverse portfolio. And if there are any questions on this one. All right, I think we're going to sort of shift, talking about a little more on the resources, the new power resources that we're looking at for the members. We are going through this big energy transition that everyone's talking about. The focus clearly is on low to no carbon emitting resources. Transmission is a very big deal, not just going through the interconnection process like we're talking about, but also building out new transmission. That's another area where we have to do a better job domestically. There's a lot of talk about permitting reform back in DC that needs to get done. Right now, it takes about 15 years to do any new significant long-distance transmission line, and that's just not acceptable given what we're trying to do. And Jared already brought it up, a lot of these new generators, these new solar projects, they're much smaller than what the grid was designed for. We're going to have to be building out a lot of new transmission lines to accommodate just a different type of resources. That will also help us making sure that these resources that are intermittent have more reliability to them by spreading them out geographically. So that's another consideration why new transmission is needed. Balancing the resources, this kind of gets into the dispatchability discussion that Brian took us to. It's such a different resource mix that we're now using, and we're starting to experience what it's like to have all this solar in the system in the West. We're seeing times in the spring and the fall where there's way more solar than we need. Can we do more batteries? Yes, we can. And that's something that we'll explore. But we also need to focus on still building out resources that are dispatchable that we can use to balance the system. And that's, when you look at the interconnection queue, that has not been a focus of the last 5 to 10 years. Energy supply chain will be another thing to grapple with as we go through the energy transition. We're in the process of bringing a lot of domestic manufacturing back to the U.S., but that's going to take time. I think it's exciting to see it, but right now, a little more than 80% of all of the solar modules come from China, and that's an interesting phenomenon. It creates all sorts of national security issues, and it's interesting to see how many issues now are becoming national security ones. Department of Energy has launched an initiative making sure that data centers don't go abroad because they want that to be happening here. So that's another reason that's sort of creating some challenges, is keeping a lot of those over here. Next slide, please. All right, so what our philosophy as UAMPS, looking at new resources, we're looking at all of the above as far as new resources and offering that as sort of the menu for our members, recognizing that members then have the autonomy to choose what the right resource mix is for their community. Part of this is looking at energy efficiency, because that really can be some of the cheapest new resource development you do. So we've been really trying to encourage the members, if they haven't spent a lot of time doing that energy efficiency initiatives, to really double down on that activity, especially given how long it takes to get some of these new generators online. But see up here, we're looking at all different types. I will say that we're not actively looking at offshore wind, so that picture is somewhat misleading. But we'd look at it for you guys. Yeah, in the Great Salt Lake, if it's still there. All right, next slide, Jared. One thing that, it's nice to have new folks around like Jared, because it seems like it kind of reinvigorates things that had been talked about for a while. And since Jared's been around, we have been looking more in a consortium approach with our California, Nevada members, looking at if we can't find some resources that are closer to y'all. And when you look at Lassen, Fallon, Truckee, Plumas, Sierra, and you put the loads in the aggregate, it's a nice group. It's about 120 megawatts. And I think that's very promising, especially for some of the projects that I think are particularly interesting to Truckee, like geothermal. Some of those tend to be smaller scale. We have been seeing problems in actually going through the procurement process with some of these geothermal projects, and I'll speak to that. But that's something that we are working on and trying to figure that out. And I think there are going to be a lot more opportunities, and it seems like there's a lot more willingness to look at it that way amongst the California, Nevada UAMPS members. So we'll be doing that. I mean, of course, a lot of benefit there will be minimization of transmission cost and not looking at stuff so far east. And I also think there's just good geographic diversity towards it too, right? I mean, we see geographic diversity between our utility scale solar project that's on the Navajo Nation and then the one that is about an hour north of Salt Lake City. So it's sort of a nice thing to consider. Next slide, Jared. So these are projects that we're looking at for the members, and Truckee's looking at participating in these projects. The first one is a solar and storage project. This is down in south central Utah, a couple hours south, about 2.5 hours, 3 hours south of Salt Lake City. It'd be a 25-year power purchase agreement. We were very, very close to having this completely done, and we were actually going through a different part of the transmission process. You have to go through the interconnection process, and then you have to actually go through a transmission service request, which deals with actually delivering the energy. It's slightly different, and ran into a problem on that side of it. So we're currently working through that issue, but we're hopeful that we get on the other side of that and move forward with this project. So it'd be 100 megawatts, 50 megawatt battery. This would be our first utility scale battery project. So optimistic that this one comes to fruition. Next slide. I will say, you don't need to go back, Jared, but we did do an integrated resource plan like Truckee has done. And one takeaway out of it was that we needed, if we were going to do more solar, we should look at doing solar with batteries and not just do any more solar because of some of the issues with just not needing that solar energy during the shoulder months. Very typical, our load's I think, somewhat typical of the Truckee load, where shoulder months, your load is way, way down, and that's very typical for most of our members. So, yes, Steve?
Could you just touch on for the board and the public, the take or pay contract?
Yeah.
What that means and the benefit and drawback?
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you asked that question because what it means is as long as they're generating electricity, we're going to have to take that electricity and pay for it. We don't necessarily, we could not take it per se, but we would still have to pay for it. And that's something that's also emerging that we're exploring is given that we don't need the solar all the time, there is this new trend where certain buyers like ourselves are changing that contracting structure to where it's more of an agreement that they will take it when they need it. And what that means is, yes, they're paying more on a per unit basis for it, because when you think about it, the developer's got a certain revenue collection requirement they've got to meet. And so they just are willing to agree to a different pricing structure so they still get their same revenue collection requirement. And then the buyer, us, would just be taking it when we need it. And that's something that we're looking into further. Because another way of thinking about it is, the solar may seem like it's low cost, but once you go through all the integration costs and dealing with it when you don't need it, it's a much different cost.
Markets and structures changing that there's anywhere to sell that extra sunshine that just won't stop freaking coming from the sun all the time? Like, because that's kind of what you're talking about. Like, our system is full. We don't need any more. Say it's noon in June.
Yeah.
And we are solared up. We don't need any more solar. It's still generating. We have to take it because
Yeah.
we paid for it. Are there markets that exist where we can sell that energy to people who don't have solar? Is that another interconnection transmission snarl?
It's not an interconnection transmission snarl so much as it's a emerging market issue. And, the CMEA folks were talking about the Pathways initiative, which would essentially, in a lot of ways, expand the footprint of the CAISO. And what we're currently looking at is what's referred to as the Energy Day Ahead Market, and that would be rolled out in 2026 if the schedule keeps. So that could open up the opportunities for more trading across a much wider footprint. But given the amount of solar that's continuing to come on the system, I think everyone's anticipating a large oversupply in the fall. Yeah, in the fall and the spring. Yeah. I mean, especially the spring, you have to also, we're just such a weather-dependent industry, which I think is one of the cooler aspects of it. But when you think about the spring, you're also dealing with a ton of hydro. So it's kind of doubly bad to deal with a lot of solar and hydro, and it just messes up the pricing. that's why this sort of different contracting structure, I think, is something to look at. Yeah. Next slide, please. Horse Butte Wind, we're currently going through and looking at doing a software upgrade that will add another 6 megawatts of capacity. Right now it's a little less than 60 megawatts, this wind farm, so it add about 6 more to that. We're also looking at expanding up to 100 megawatts, and the commercial operation date of that expansion is uncertain. We've gone through a process of getting new cost numbers from the manufacturer recently, but we still would need to go through that interconnection queue process. So this expansion likely would not be online until later this decade. But still looking at, we have the land secured through leases, so we want to explore that opportunity. Next slide. Uinta Wind, this is a project in Wyoming. It's good wind in Wyoming. You can see 40% capacity factor, and what that just means is that over the 8,760 hours of a year, it is generating about 40% of the time. I mean, it's not a consistent 40% of the time with wind. It's all over the place. But 25-year power purchase agreement, same structure, take or pay, and anticipated online date for this one is 2027. It has gone through the interconnection process. Yeah, I mean that's one way that we sort of gate new projects. If it's gone through the interconnection process, they're very attractive to us. So, next slide. Geothermal. All right, so I'm going to give an overview of the projects we've looked at and are still looking at, and then a little more flavor as to what's going on in the geothermal marketplace. It is a very hot marketplace, as they tell me, which I think is very much pun intended for them. So we were looking at 2 projects with CERC. These projects were in Nevada, so they were kind of great for our Nevada, California members. And then they went through some management changes, and recently, we've had more communication with them, and they're pulling away from moving forward with contracting, and their pulling back is not atypical. This has been happening all over the place. I talked to other publicly owned utilities, POUs in California, and they've had the same stuff happen to them. And I'll explain kind of what's going on there. These projects are still, these 2 locations are still being explored. They're still being developed. So I think that we're going to stay in touch. But unfortunate for us, they did not want to move forward with contracting. So that creates some planning uncertainty for us, but we're still going to keep an eye on these 2 site locations. We did go through an RFP process recently, again, on geothermal, and coming out of that, we identified 2 projects to continue moving forward with. One is this rototherm project, and it's a very small project, but the reason why we're attracted to it is that it has the ability to expand out to 50 megawatts. They're using a new technology, and this is kind of the excitement around geothermal right now. If you're not familiar, a lot of the drilling techniques coming from fracking are just getting brought over. It's a lot of horizontal drilling. A lot of oil and gas guys are now geothermal developers, and they're very, very savvy in drilling, which is great, because one of the big cruxes in developing geothermal was going through all the exploratory drilling, and that whole process would take several years, and now there's a lot more expertise in that part of it. So we're looking at doing a 20-year take-or-pay power purchase agreement with the rototherm project. This 3.6 megawatts anticipated to come on summer of 2026. So we'll watch that closely. And this one's located real close to Beaver, Utah, if anyone's familiar with that. This next one is Cove Point. This is an existing geothermal site they're looking at doing an expansion to for 35 megawatts, similar 25-year take-or-pay purchase agreement. The developer here is Ormat, which is located in Reno. We've worked with them before on our waste heat project. They were the technology provider for that. Online date for this would be January of 2028. Next slide, Jared. So what's going on in geothermal? One big driver was a CPUC mandate, which required non-weather dependent, non-battery, zero emission energy. So there's few types of energy that would meet that. And that caused a big rush on geothermal. The other bullet up here was developers contracting directly with large loads. And that's, I've said that more nicely in the bullet than I'll say now. What this really is folks like Amazon, Google, gobbling up geothermal megawatts from these developers, doing 400 megawatt deals. And so that's doesn't really leave a lot of opportunities. And they, given their data center needs, do not have the same pricing points that we do. The market has gone up, and sort of take it down to the pricing section. Market was about $70 a couple years ago. I think Jared's done some of those $70 deals in his past life, sort of where it was. Now it's north of 100. Some of these deals are 120 plus. So that's been an interesting phenomenon. And when we went through our RFP process, a lot of the sort of developers that are in the space right now that are really good at press releases didn't even respond. And sorry to be a little jaded on them, but it's kind of it's an interesting marketplace right now.
You just can't compete with those multi-billion, trillion-dollar companies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can, and yeah, and UAMPS, Google, we just don't look the same in the press release.
Right.
But we're still going to keep pressing forward because I think there's a lot of opportunity in geothermal. It's just the market is a little, it's sort of like the housing market was a little like a year ago. Maybe it's settling out. We'll just wait for a period of time. I mean, the other really challenging thing I already spoke to at the last bullet here that's worth mentioning is that they're not willing to commit on pricing, and they're not willing to commit on development milestones. And that makes it very challenging for us to then plan for the members about, okay, well, when's this project coming online? What sort of bridge project do we need to secure for the members? It's a frustrating space, but we're going to keep going at it. Next slide. I think that may be we've got natural gas still. Natural gas, we are currently looking at 2 natural gas plants, developing them. One would be a combined cycle plant, 360 megawatts. This one would be in southeastern Idaho. The other would be a simple cycle peaking project, and 200 megawatts. This one would be in central Utah. Both of these projects, technologies we're looking at, you'd be able to burn hydrogen there. I think it's just the prudent course to look at technology that would have that ability to burn hydrogen into the future. Right now, pricing on hydrogen is very expensive, so it would not be economic today to do that. The combined cycle plant would operate more in a baseload capacity, which would be, more than 40% of the time it would be generating. On the simple cycle, it would generate a lot less, and we see this as a really nice complement to renewables. And that's really the value we see in the simple cycle plant moving forward. And I think, one more. Thanks, Jackie. Next slide. And I know last time I was here, I was talking about nuclear. We certainly have, even though we terminated the carbon-free power project that we were working on for the members, we still see a role for nuclear moving forward. We've recently moved forward with a letter of intent with a nuclear developer to look at the developer developing, constructing the project, and then selling us or offering us a power purchase agreement. This is in the early phases of work with them. The plan would be to work on negotiating this power purchase agreement over the next 6 months. This technology would come on in the 2030 timeframe. The technology has not been selected. The location has not been selected. We would look at maybe doing a prepayment of energy to get the cost down. That prepayment of energy would only occur after the project has been fully constructed and is operating. And the approach here that we're taking with nuclear is, we were on the bleeding edge of doing the new nuclear and taking the role as developer, constructor, and in this new approach, we're having the developer do that. We have a lot of new projects going on, and we know what it takes, frankly, to do a new nuclear project, and we want someone else to do that. That's, yeah. Lessons learned, exactly. No, it is. And all of these projects we went through before this, these are very time-intensive efforts to go through all these projects. And we recognize, this is sort of my last slide, that not all of these projects are going to move forward. But as we go through our process with UAMPS, another thing that we've done coming out of our integrated resource plan is we have a new resource procurement plan that's a multi-year plan. So when we see projects move through the development, we can start really planning for them and making sure that we're meeting the load needs of the members. And if we have to find market products to bridge the time for certain members while new generation's getting built, then we'll do that. But it's a very integrated plan between all the projects that we're looking at, making sure that we're meeting the members' needs, just because the landscape of developing is just much harder than it was. So we'll update that every year moving forward. But that's the last slide. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Sure.
All right, any public comment on the UAMPS presentation?
Courtney Morrell, Tahoe Donner. I just have a question, and I am piecing together the department update from Energy, from Jared Carpenter. The pie chart showed something like 30% of undisclosed energy, something, I don't quite have the lingo, and then this last presentation talked about within the sector, it's 30% purchases. Are those the same thing?
Essentially, yes. There's a few nuances in there, but essentially, yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other public comment? Okay, we'll close public comment, and any other board questions or comments, thoughts? Tony?
No, just thank you for the update. I do appreciate the chart where you kind of showed all these projects in queue and sort of the stumbling blocks, sort of, whether it's bureaucratically or environmentally, but, that these things are out there, but they are sort of stuck. And how hard it is to get some of these resources from the planning phase to the generation phase, 6, 7, 10, 15, 20 years, it seems like. So I think it's good to hear those things, and I think it lends to, also for utilities like ourselves to also be cognizant of how local generation can sort of help, slowly fill those gaps a little bit, and be a little bit more nimble. It's not, I don't think the scale of those projects, really meets long-term needs, but it starts to at least make a dent, so. Cool.
So
Krista?
much. Don't worry, I'm not gonna, but thank you. That was a lot of really good information, really helpful information. I kind of look forward to hearing more about your integrated resource plan. I know you've got a call out in October with all of the co-ops, and I hope to sit in on that and learn more about how everybody else is feeling and what other, POUs that you serve, what our needs are altogether. I appreciate you. I mean, you were here for the CMUA presentation, so you can see what we operate under. We're a small California utility. We operate under the rules of California, which are, I don't want to choose the wrong word.
Good and bad.
Good and bad. It's real, right? It's a real burden that we have to comply with. So starting to think of sort of the little Western, our little Lassen sister utilities as a group, I think might be very helpful for us here on your western edge. Geothermal obviously has a lot of appeal because of what you pointed out, the CPUC's mandate there. Understanding, you laid out the challenges pretty clearly. There's a bidding war. I'm not speaking for myself, I'm not speaking for the board, any interest in a bidding war, that sort of thing. It's just artificially driving up prices. We just need the energy coming online. We don't need to be, pushing that price up ourselves. I would rather let other people, in the big scheme of things, it's still taking, the place of greenhouse gas emitting fossil fuels. Somebody's getting it. Of course, it's Google, right? But eventually, these things they're gonna mellow out, and we'll have our opportunity. And as long as you're paying attention, so I think you're gonna spot it for us. So we appreciate that. The whole data center. I feel like it's such a good use of AI would be to solve, to wade through these intricacies, and yet they're buying the energy but not solving the problem. And things like natural gas. I personally would rather have a natural gas contract than buying purchases in the open market. I just, the vagaries out there are, so I get the role that it plays as we make this transition ultimately away from fossil fuels. So anyway, obviously, I'm interested in this. I like learning more about it. I appreciate you coming in and breaking us down in much more granular fashion for us. So thank you. I will yield my, I'll cut myself off.
Any thoughts, Joe?
Mr. Baker, since I've been on the board, it's been many years, but I think we were with Sierra Pacific was our provider, and then we went to Idaho Power, and I think that's when we had a little problem with some contracts. And I think was it Steve Hollenby that found you folks? Well, since then, I've been very thankful that UAMPS has been our provider to this time. I feel that your corporation or company it was very easy to work with, and you provided us with what we needed, and you tried to get what we needed, and I think it was a good partnership, shall we say, with the TDPUD and the UAMPS. I wanted to say that. And I thank you and appreciate that you being here tonight and give us a review again on this, that was great. That was fine. So thank you again.
All right, thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Mason. Really excellent presentation, dove in deep, got us thinking about the future, and glad you're working well with Jared and getting some great ideas and turning over the stones and just looking for cool projects. So really exciting to hear about all this. So thank you.
Oh, I want to ask one more question.
Yep.
On that nuclear power, it only comes out on a 31-year purchase plan? Oh, yeah, I didn't-
Oh, sure, yeah, and then we can all hear you. Yeah, that'd be great.
So the current structure we're looking at is a 30-year power purchase agreement. Any new nuclear facility likely would be licensed for 40 years. That's the standard initial licensing term. Did learn some of these things with the BASS project. So it would have at least 40 years under the initial licensing term. Typically, most of these new reactors are being designed for an engineering life of around 80 years. Current fleet, there's 100 different reactors operating domestically. A lot of them have gone through their 40 years and are into their 20-year license extension terms. Some of them are getting close to second license extension term for another 20 years.
No, it says 20 years. My hearing aids went out.
Oh.
They just shut down.
License extension on the
Yeah.
existing nuclear power plants.
Yeah, but if we get a purchase contract with you folks, the purchase contract would be 31 years.
30 years, the power purchase agreement would be 30 years. We likely would build extensions into that 30-year because it would, in all likelihood, operate for at least 40 years, probably 60 years, more 80 years of operation. So we'd want to have extension terms to the 30-year.
Well, there'd be extensions for that.
Yeah.
But after 31 years.
Yes.
We have to sign for 31 years, originally.
It would, yes, our contracting with our members would be at least the same term of 30 years, yes.
I remember one of the downs I had with the PUD was, I think it was Idaho Power, they wanted a 50-year contract. Do you remember that, Jeff? You weren't on the board then, but we had problems with 50 years. And it was a yes and go. The manager wanted to go because the price was set, but we don't know what happens in 50 years, I asked him, I said, that's a long time. That's a mortgage.
Yeah.
For time too. And he said, well, the power price is good and we can get it and we can tie it up for maybe 50 years. I says, maybe, because things happen in 50 years that prices do go up somehow. And Steve Hollabaugh, I was, I think, the bad vote because I didn't vote for it. And Steve Hollabaugh was sitting in the audience there, and I was looking at him, and it came to me to vote. And Steve looked at me, and I looked at him, and he went. I said, good, because he was keeping me up with the times and so on, that contract. And I'm glad he did that, because the public liked the one price, but they didn't really like the long term, and I didn't like the long term either to begin with. But I think that's when we found you folks. We went with you, and I'm so glad we did. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Is that a wrap?
I think so. Local biomass is looking pretty good, huh?
You're right. Great. I think there we are. Thank you very much. All right.
just to close out the section, instead of opening it, there's no fiscal impact with this item, it's a workshop, and the recommendation is for just to take input to the staff, so thanks.
Got it. And we got that. Check. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Takes us to item 18, and that is routine business. Approval of the treasurer's report for September 2024. Joe?
I'll move to pass the report. We even read it over good tonight.
Oh, good, good.
Yeah.
So there's three parts to that: fund balances,
And,
disbursements,
pay the
and delinquent
bills, pay the
accounts. Yes.
And the third part was,
Delinquent accounts, fund
Oh,
balances.
I saw that.
And disbursements paying the
just
bills.
move to whatever the staff says to do with them.
Got it. We got a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right.
Does anybody have
Got a
anything?
motion.
Do we have to have public input? Do we
Oh,
have to
yeah,
ask
I'll do, is there any input on the routine business? All right, seeing none, we'll, and then there weren't any questions. Okay, shaking heads. We got a motion and a second. Sarah, roll call, please.
Director Aguirre?
Yes.
Director Harris?
Yes.
Director Laliotis?
Yes.
Vice President Finn?
Yes.
President Bender?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I thought that the payments that are owed to us was fairly low this year. Did you read that part?
Delinquent account write-offs.
Yeah, the
Don't
write-offs.
recall.
I think they're a little lower than they have
Oh,
been.
that's good. Coming down.
People are catching up
Yeah.
from their COVID problems.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Okay. Items 19 and 20, closed sessions. 19, closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D1, conference with legal counsel, existing litigation, Shauna Kuhlmeyer versus Truckee Downer PUD.
Thank you,
And-
folks.
Thank you. And item 20, closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54957, Public Employee General Manager's Performance Plan Review. And we'll be heading off to closed session. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Oh,